I'm going to use a mechanical pencil and establish the location of my sun off center. My lines are going to be slightly darker than what you should use. I like to go very light, but I'm doing it a little darker so you can see. This is the top of my telephone pole, and I'm going to arch out the sides of my road. I'll be like where my tree line goes and the edge of my road. I'm kind of hooking it over to the horizon and adding in organic style tree lines, kind of just giving a bushy line. My telephone poles are going to be nice and vertical, and they get closer together as they get further away. I'm going to use a size 10 round brush. I'm going to mop in some clean water, kind of establish some wet areas so that my wet on wet can bleed into each other. Starting with some Indian yellow, going to establish the area around my sun. I love going in blotchy with these colors. Some areas are more saturated with clean water, some areas have more pigment, and that helps give us a nice loose edge. I'm going to use this Indian yellow. I decide later that that Quin violet is way too blue, and that blue is definitely not where we want to go. We want to stick in the phthalo blue area, maybe some Prussian. Indian yellow is our friend for this. I love how saturated and deep it is. I'm trying to keep my sun white, but I'm hugging very close to it with the yellow, kind of keeping some deep edges of color into where I establish those trees. Many people struggle to retain the loose style when they do watercolor. You'll notice the pressure I put on my brush varies. Sometimes I am just using the tip, sometimes I'm pressing deep down and laying the bristles down. This purple is wrong. I can tell it's already getting gray by pressing it into my yellow, so we decide early on to abandon that and go straight into my perm red light. I'm deepening the color in the area above my tree line and mimicking it on my reflective road. You want to let the wet nature of the paper help blend your colors, but do not use your brush to do a lot of blending. You'll notice wet on wet is very abrasive on the paper and can chew it up very easily. I've thoroughly cleaned the orange out of my brush and I'm going into the phthalo blue. Keep in mind, blue and yellow will give you a green, so you want to be very cautious with how these two colors play together. A clean brush that has been patted off onto the paper towel makes a good mop to soak up some of these areas that haven't worked out well. And again, very cautious not to sit too long in an area to blend. I don't want all of my yellow to turn green with the presence of this blue. I get this variation in the color saturation by kind of patting and stippling my brush. I'm going to let the placement of my lines dictate where I go now. You'll see that these lines that are showing the reflections do line up with where I established the poles. This layer needs to completely dry before I can move on. See how much lighter it looks when it's dry? Using perm red light again, I'm going in where I have roughed in my poles and on the edge of my road, stippling and patting my brush so that my color variation again is inconsistent. That gives us that nice loose edge, that loose look. Darkening and deepening up that tree line so that it looks like it's very pigmented through my horizon. I clean my brush and I pick up just clean water, go around the edges, and you'll see all those harsh lines soften. Again, don't spend too much time with a wet brush on wet paper. It's very abrasive to wet paper, and that's how you chew up the surface. We decided that was too purpley, so we're going into the Perm Red Violet. It's a little more red, and it kind of works better with this orange. Going to deepen the area around my sun with the Indian yellow again. It looks messy now, but 3 or 4 layers of these loose and blotchy techniques will give you something that looks complete and finished. I am going to embrace a little bit of green in these areas. This is a tree area. I just don't want to mix the green. I'm encouraging the yellow to show over the blue, which creates kind of a lensing effect and gives us that green. Too much is there, so again, clean brush, dry it off, and it can help me mop off my excess. Blending my edges again with some clean water. And clean brush mopping out the inside of my sun, trying to get any of that color that tried to sneak in there. You'll notice it completely dried. I'm on another layer now. Going back into phthalo blue, I'm giving a little more detail this time. I'm not going to pay so much attention to blending out my edges. When you work with a wet brush on dry paper, you can get much crisper lines and deeper color. You need to make sure that it's fully dry in order for you to not blend into the previous layers. I really want to deepen up my contrast so that my trees are very dark compared to the background. Using the tip of my brush to follow along the tree line that I had established with my drawing. I have to pay attention to the telephone pole lines when I'm doing these. These are the reflections of the poles. I don't like that one, so I'm going to fix it. I didn't feel as if the edge of my road over here looked quite right, so I hooked it in just a little bit more by adding more of this blue, kind of biting into it a little bit deeper. I'm cleaning my brush and dropping in some clean water onto these areas that are still wet. What's going to happen is any of the pigment that is sitting still on top of the paper, waiting to penetrate into the paper, will start moving around with the clean water. The water will push it outward, so you'll get these cauliflower style blooms. Again with the perm red light. You want to be very careful when this touches the blue because these two colors together can give you something that looks very black. We want to embrace the contrast, but we don't want to lose the actual color we're trying to apply. You'll want to use a much smaller brush for this, either a 2 or a 3 round. I have a pretty shaky hand, so this is difficult for me. You want to make sure your poles go vertically up and down, and you want to make sure that each pole is parallel to the previous pole. Now the reflections are starting to make sense for the placement. My horizontal tops of my poles are going to touch that line I established and create a T. Now keep in mind they get smaller each and every single step down. Going to carry the reflection through this yellow area. Again, grabbing that big brush, I'm going to add a little more contrast into the sky. I love these blooms. I don't want to lose the blooms. And I lost them. I'm going to use a smaller brush again. I need to do the dot thingies on our poles. These actually take quite the steady hand. You have to be very careful when you're dolloping them in. You don't want them all to be the same size. The ones closer to you should be bigger. It's not that easy to graduate the sizes down, so be very cautious as you're adding those in. This layer needs to totally dry before we can move on. I ended up with a very deep puddle of blue in that small telephone pole, and when I patted it with a paper towel, I took away too much color, so I'm trying to fix it now. These need to have more definition in front of the tree line. And I think a smaller layer of bushes in front of them helps blend everything cohesively together. I'm going to use a ballpoint wet pen to do the lining. You want to use something acid-free for this. We're going to connect the dots and have it bow just slightly so there's a little sag in the line. Those are connected, the tops are connected, so I end up with 3 wire lines that goes all the way across and carries to the outside of the paper. And you want to sign everything you do. Always sign it. And I always put the year. Here's our favorite part again, taking the tape off, but I bet it's going to stick right there. I don't really recommend this washi tape. It likes to chew up the edges of my paper. I expected a huge puddle under this area. There's very little bleeding. I'm actually pretty impressed. I have better luck with painter's tape or a white masking tape, so if you're going to do your edges, I'd more recommend that. I love this itty bitty area in the corner. I love all the color variation in that one section. It's my favorite spot. And there you have it. If you like what you saw, go ahead and like, subscribe, comment. Anything that gets traffic to my channel is appreciated.